I've got loads of questions, but I'm going to let everybody else get in first. Who has any questions?
So, for those of you I haven't met, my name's Ellie Harwood. I work for Child Poverty Action Group. I've led the charity's work in Wales for about 5 years, although I'm actually spending quite a lot of time working on UK level policy at the moment towards a new child poverty strategy for the UK. But I've known David for quite a long time now, and mainly correspondence really around school food and just good food generally. It's something that I'm quite passionate about myself, as well. And as an organisation, we believe really strongly in the social value of free school meals. So we campaigned a lot on achieving universal free school meals for primary pupils. We now have a campaign where we'd like to see that universal provision extended to secondary schools. I think, Jenny, what you said about the issues around food in secondary schools, we would absolutely agree. So our projects that my team are running now are working in secondary schools in 4 local authority areas, including Monmouthshire. And we're working with young people as youth voice champions. So they're kind of being peer researchers and telling us what they need to change in their school settings. And unsurprisingly, food comes up as a very high priority. And I think one of the things we need to recognise is that there's actually quite a great deal of injustice and inequality now in our school system, where children in primary schools get free breakfasts and free lunches universally. And then when you enter year 7 and make that transition, not only do you lose your now what you had transitional protection perhaps, and you were getting free meals, but you start having to pay because you no longer qualify under the means test, but that there aren't those extra things, like free breakfast as well. So children are really conscious because they have younger siblings or they've been primary school pupils themselves, that that we know that young people's well-being just about falls off a cliff when they make that transition from primary to secondary. And when you talk to young people, they're really conscious that this inequality is there. But what we also know, and I'm chair of the advisory panel for the Children's Commissioner, and she runs monthly surveys with young people. So we get a lot of really good real-time data now on food insecurity and the worries that children and young people have. And more than a quarter of teenagers in Wales are worried about having enough to eat. And I just think that's not something that you need to be worrying about when you've got GCSEs. And, we all talk about these kind of things. We worry for our young people with mental health and kind of, online behavior and things. But actually, food insecurity is just such a huge feature. If it doesn't affect that child personally, one of their friends will. So we're running a big survey at the moment for young people all around the UK, and we've paid for a big boosted sample in Wales so we can get a really good picture of kind of how these kinds of inequalities, things like food insecurity, are really impacting social relationships. And it really does have a big impact, on children's well-being when they witness it amongst their friends, as well as when it happens to them directly. So, I think we have to view the improving school food as it's like that sort of the metaphor of a giant tanker to turn around. We're not going to see miracles overnight. It takes years for people to become accustomed to eating the types of food that we might think are best served. If people haven't had the opportunity in life early on, as you say, Jenny, particularly to be able to eat those kinds of very fresh, natural foods, it just seems obscure. And I think we've got to remember that all the time we've got this food environment that is just branded and marketed and designed, and they have teams of spend millions of pounds designing the packaging and optimizing these flavors to appeal. So it's really, really, really tough battle for parents, for everyone to sort of shut out that noise. And in some ways in schools, I think it is an easier task if you just don't have packed lunches, because that it does take that choice away. But it's a politically very, very difficult and unpopular. I would say, generally people don't like the idea of preventing children, families from choosing what their children eat. But anyway, the main thing is, we know that there are a lot of children still in poverty who aren't getting free school meals because the current means test is very tight, and most people would like to see that means test for free school meals in secondary schools raised. We would like to see it go altogether. We think there should be universal meals for the health, well-being and inclusion benefits, and it wouldn't actually cost that much more to make provision universal. And then I think that's when you can really get that economy of scale at local authority level when you're thinking about procurement and distribution. But it does mean also a massive change in terms of how food is procured, the contracts that are in place in secondary schools. You know, that you're right that they're absolutely trying to spin a profit on everything. So if you get free school meals, you get a small allowance. It's been set very, very low for a long time, and most councils have resisted putting it up, which is good in one way, but also it narrows down what those kids can get. So they might be able to get a sandwich and a piece of fruit, but they can't afford a drink, you know, as a classic one. So they have to choose between being hungry or thirsty. And then the challenge comes with having lots and lots of extras. So if you're someone who's got money from home, lots of children have about £5 a day to spend now, we find, and they can buy crisps, cookies, hot dogs, break times, the classic time, iced buns, pizza. So even if your main meal is regulated and is a beautiful, nutritionally balanced, fresh meal, they've got this environment that's just selling lots and lots of really, you know, not particularly nutritious, very energy dense food that's much cheaper than the main meal. And it really is very difficult for young people, but in that environment where it's literally being marketed to them. And if you've only got £1, you might choose just to eat that pizza slice at break time and then have no lunch. And this is what happens in reality with how teenagers eat at school. So, you know, there are some really tough things to do with the system around food in schools that need addressing. But I do think if we want to see that change, you need universal provision, because that's the only way that the money is going to come in to make it feasible. Extending the means test to make it a little bit less tight at secondary school is still not going to provide the volume of diners, I think, because they will opt for the much less healthy, cheaper sort of junk food break time options, or they'll leave the school premises and go and eat chips or get the £1 McDonald's lunch meal instead. So, you know, you've got to make it appealing as well. It's got to make it economic sense. It's got to make social sense. It's got to feel like something that's just a really normal and desirable thing to do. And that's quite a big challenge with teenagers. So you have to involve them as well. You know, they have to be part of that, and a nice dining environment and some freedom and autonomy and choice. And, you know, all of these things really matter. You know, it's a different challenge to the primary schools, you know, where I think actually I'm amazed at the progress we've made. I know there are so many things that still need to be done, but I still every day, you know, hear examples and see examples as well, the difference that policy is making. So I think, you know, yeah, you've got to be optimistic. But I guess that's where we are in terms of, you know, what we'd like to see changing around food in schools.
So, Jackie, your question.
Well, someone who comes from an NHS procurement background, I always worry that we're not quite getting this right in local authorities in relation to the food. You know, we can be planning, can't we, Jenny? Like you were saying, we should be thinking on a Wales scale about how we, you know, produce, how we let our farmers know what we want, etc. And actually, the costs would come down considerably if we're doing it the right way. So that's what I'd be pushing, get the procurement. But it is a holistic approach. What Ellie was saying, I listened to that live event the other day, and some of the things they were saying also was the regulations aren't quite right yet, are they? That they are not yet, exactly. So they're still exactly. So, you know, like in schools, especially the bigger schools where they are allowed to buy and sell, then that shouldn't be allowed. That needs to change, so that regulation says that you know, they can't. And the same in hospitals, by the way, which I know we're getting better at it. But, you know, your vending machine shouldn't have anything in it that's going to be high sugar and, you know, all the rest of it, really. But I think there's some really good stuff coming, but it needs to be holistic. And that means you've got to involve the parents. You've got to engage them to get on board with us. So it's a whole approach to me, Jenny. So after listening to that live event, I was quite, you know, excited that people are talking. There are groups of people coming together and looking at this. And Ellie, the great work you're doing. And you're right, universal, I'd be on the back of that, because we can't start young and then suddenly let them change their diet when they get to 11, 12, and then go into adulthood. It just doesn't make sense. So I haven't got a question. I just wanted to make a point, really, Jenny, that I think it's some really good stuff here. And whatever we need to do as co-op members and that to promote and get that message out as well is something we need to consider when we're putting our manifesto together and stuff as well, so that we're just not just talking about the ultra process, but what does public procurement need to be doing to enable it to happen too. So anyway, some great stuff. Thank you.
Next question. Or Jenny, or Ellie, do you have a response to what Jackie just said?
Yeah, I think in the school where I'm a governor, which is a Church in Wales school, and it's got a feisty head teacher, and he was spending too much time trying to get the kitchen to deliver the meals that the kids needed. In the end, I can't go on like this, too much of my time. So we left the catering contract that the local authority provides and went out to tender. Now we've ended up with the enemy, which is Chartwell's, which is a major multinational, but we only serve 3 meals, choice of 3 meals, all with veg. That's what they get. And obviously they have a system where you pay on a card, so nobody can see who's getting the free meals, although they may know for other reasons. The problem they have is that because most of them come by bus, because it's a Church in Wales school, so lots of them don't eat breakfasts. So the school does provide breakfast for starving children, but when they get break time at about 11, they've often spent a lot of the money they were supposed to use for the main meal. But we've controlled that as well. They're not allowed to serve rubbish. They can have a grab bag, if they want to go off and play football at lunchtime, they can buy it at 11 and then eat it when they feel like it. So it's better, but we still haven't got rid of UPF, but it's something. I think it's really complicated. I think that Lynn Neagle has done quite a lot behind the scenes. She got health visitors to ensure that they were making sure that that new mums were getting the Healthy Start vouchers. It was something ridiculous, like 40%, until she got going with them. So it's now 78%, or it was when I last looked at it, which is what mums can buy free fruit and veg with. And the second thing is that what's just been implemented, I think last week, is that the supermarkets are not going to be able to have the bog offs in just full of all the wrong things placed near the till. It's going to be healthy food, has to be near the till. But that you won't see the difference. Obviously it'll take a little bit of time, but those are 2 things she's done. So she is interested in this because she understands that many children are only fed in school what you would call food. But I'll shut up there. There's 2 people who want to ask a question or make a contribution.
I have to say, Jenny, I'm absolutely delighted. I suppose I should say Ellie as well. I don't know really either of you particularly well, but I appreciate, Jenny, that you are one of our MSs, etc. And David and I are working on our usual May event, which will be all about ultra processed food, and you'll I'm sure have been briefed on that. But I feel of myself as almost like the smoker converted, or the fitness and food person converted. I've run the London Marathon, so I think of myself as a fit person, and I've run it 26 times. I'm doing my 27th this year, and I've actually got a health problem of high blood pressure. and we know high blood pressure is the silent killer, and so it was doing its job neatly on me, and I thought I was fit. So I then get, what are you talking about, doctor? You know, and all this sort of thing. And I have had to accept that my problem looks like, because I do all the fitness stuff. It looks like it's my diet's been an absolute car crash. I was slavering when Ellie was describing all this food of pizzas and iced buns and cakes and biscuits. I couldn't wait to start eating, but I'm learning and realizing, and I thought of myself as a thoughtful and understanding person who knew about all this stuff, and yet I just could not resist after a run, just getting onto the quickest food I could get my hands on, and everything would go in the microwave, and it was done in seconds. And thankfully, I've now retired from the magistrates' court, so that's another story of crisis, Jenny. But I therefore am willing to make the effort to buy fruit and veg and take the time to work my way through it and cook it and prepare it. And I am loving it, although I still find it hard work to make all the right sort of meals in the best sort of way. But and so my palate is having to change, and I still can't resist certain things. Although I think we're even allowed to give ourselves a 10% or whatever what your margin might be, or I can still have some bits of naughty food. But so I'm just a work in progress on that transformation. And I wrote a motion only on Friday on ultra processed food. David has seen it, Jackie has seen it, and I want it to go to Labour and co-op parties, etc. Sarah will see it in due course. And we'll try and take that forward. I will be campaigning hell for leather on this whilst I finish the London Marathon, etc. And we've got also, I work with Incredible Edibles, so we actually are growing some food. And I therefore, Jenny, would throw at us the idea of a bigger picture or holistic. And I don't want to use it in a trite way because you guys are holistic about this, so I wouldn't want to insult you. But I just chip in. You'll find a soulmate, Jenny, in Pam Warhurst from Incredible Edible. Make a note of that, and David will confirm it, as will Jackie. Pam Warhurst was one of the founders of the Incredible Edible movement. She's based in Todmorden, and she wants the right to grow food in green public spaces. Anytime you want a conversation with her, you will find you are partners in arms on this, and I think you'll make some good progress together. And so I'll carry on digging at the allotment and growing a little bit of food. We give the food to the food bank, but then I've realised I've got to give some of the food to myself because I've got to feed myself better. But I think there is a positive side because I think if you combine it, you know, the growing of the food with allotments and Incredible Edible, if you look more closely at your cookery classes, I didn't do woodwork. I was bloody useless at that sort of stuff. But I was all right with the cookery, and I know my carbohydrate from my fat from my protein, and yet I still just bought all the wrong food. So, you know, and that is how serious it is. I don't know then whether I'm a success story or a failure story. I'm not really sure. Maybe I'm in the middle, and at the moment it's to be decided which way I can go, whether I can keep it positive. But I just see that, you know, with the cookery lessons and with the growing of the food, and then with the health of the nation. And the reason I've got so bitter and concerned about it is because, Jenny, you will surely agree, it's private profit, but it's public health and NHS cost. We're paying for the health that the private sector has created for us. And for that, I don't know whether it's the tax or some other way to say you've got to pay for the NHS, which has got all the diabetes, all the NHS and all the obesity, which you are creating. So there's a few thoughts there for yourself and Ellie. Keep up the good work, and any comments would be appreciated because I'll listen with great interest.
Thanks, Chris. You can, of course, get obese from very, very good food, which I can demonstrate to my.
Well, one thing I'll say is that, you know,
class.
people say you often get hungry and all this sort of thing. I'm not hungry eating all these lovely vegetables and fruit. I'm not getting hungry. I'm not getting hungry. And I've got the energy. I'll be going for a 13-mile run when this meeting finishes, as Jackie knows. I told her yesterday. Right. So I've joined this meeting so as not to, and then do the run. Right, thank you.
I don't know which, but there are 2 points. First of all, it would be helpful at some point, Sarah, if you could recap for us on what is happening in Monmouthshire at the moment and what your ambitions are for change. Because interestingly, you do have a local authority owned farm. And so that provides some potential for addressing supply issues. But my question is around the Nesta recent report on halving obesity. And I don't know if Ellie or Jenny or others are actually familiar with this report, but we had a speaker from them, I think, for a North Wales Party event, Jackie, didn't we? And that is on our YouTube channel. But when you realize that there are 640 diabetes amputees in Wales in the last recorded figures, it's shocking to understand that this is taking an increasing amount of NHS spend to deal with, 10% and rising. So my question is around the heavy lifting that's required at the UK level, particularly by Wes Streeting, who doesn't seem to be leading on this issue. I think that's mainly falling to agriculture, as I understand it. But the way in which we actually address ultra-processed foods through, the way their foods are formulated, the way they're taxed, the way they're marketed, the way in which the state can, if you like, benignly, without being nanny, intervene in such a way as to correct, if you like, the incorrect way in which the market is actually killing people at the moment. So I'd like both your comments, Jenny, on that. And I don't know if Ellie's seen the report, but if you look at the very end appendice to that report, there's a spreadsheet, and it actually identifies all the major areas where change is possible. And the amount of lifting that can be done at the Welsh level is minuscule. It's London that's got the power and its place within the market space in England to make the difference that's required. So back over to you, Jenny and Ellie.
Well, it is down to Wes Streeting, and I'm very disappointed that he hasn't made it one of his first tasks, but there's lots of first tasks that they haven't done. They still haven't stopped people exercising the right to buy council housing, and so they're losing it in massive numbers in London at the moment. So that does need to happen precisely because it will bankrupt the NHS if we don't act now. Because the reason that Chris is finding it difficult to resist the naughty foods is because the multinational food industry spends billions of pounds on making food addictive. And as Chris Van Tolken is the expert who's written about this, the reason why people are obese is because when they eat ultra-processed food, which contains very little nutrition, your body says, I'm still hungry, because they haven't been nourished. And if you eat your nourishing vegetables, you don't feel hungry because your body's saying, yes, I've got enough now. And that is the problem. That is the problem. It's both addictive, so it's like the peanuts or the crisps, but it's also that your body's saying, I still need nourishing. So that's why we have to act on ultra processed food. And we have got the sugar tax that the Tories did, for goodness sake, which showed that actually it forced the food industry to change and have less sugary drinks. So they would change too. They're very agile, but the outcome would be we wouldn't bankrupt the NHS. We spend 17% of the NHS budget in Wales on caring for people with diabetes. 17% of the whole budget because it's really expensive to do all those checks to make sure that people are not going blind and they're not having such poor circulation that we have to chop off their foot or their arm. And the 640 amputees must be in the last year, because you see them everywhere. If you go to the hospital, you'll see a couple of amputees hanging around, smoking outside. And their life chances are, their mortality rate chances are normally within 3 years they'll be dead, because once you start chopping off people's limbs, it all becomes very grim indeed. So it's a huge problem, and one of the things we are not doing nearly well enough in Wales is to intervene when people become pre-diabetes. Because a couple of members of my family who live in England, both of them, had a blood test which showed pre-diabetes. One of them happened to have a locum doctor who was obsessed about this, because I think somebody in her family died of diabetes, and she put him on this really strict diet, cut out all that alcohol and cheese that he was munching on, and he turned it round. He took off weight, and he's now got normal blood pressure. And it's the same with the other guy as well. People just have to be aware that what they're doing to themselves. And that is so much cheaper. If we've got, a nurse who's been trained by the dietitians, you have to get the whole family in the room, because otherwise it's no good. If all the others are eating rubbish and you've been told to eat lettuce, guess what happens? So yeah, I think you have to get the whole family in the room and say, do you want your loved one to have these really awful things happen to them? No. Right. In that case, you've all got to change the way what you eat. And you may need cookery classes to understand this is how you make a simple meal. So we have a lot to do there. So no change is not an option in my view, because there's all sorts of other things we need to attend to that we can't at the moment.
Thank you. Yeah, I was interested that you said you thought we were doing particularly well in Monmouthshire, because to me it seems as though we have a lot to do. We are cooking we've always had or have kept, the council school meals service, and the kitchens in school where they do cook from fresh. One of the things that we've been working on is about that the uptake, and particularly amongst the schools where there's a lot of low income families. I mean, we're a very unequal county. We've got schools where the complaint is that there's no mashed avocado with the free breakfast club, and we've got schools where a lot of the children would be having a free school meal under the old system, and some of those families are the families where the children don't want the school meal, or there's a resistance to it. I think the new standards will greatly help us. One of our big problems is the standard portion size, that we have a regulated portion size that is the same for a 4-year-old as for an 11-year-old, which drives overwhelm in the smaller ones, and food and the demand for packed lunches, I think, in the older ones. So I'm really glad that we're able to go away from that. We're wanting to work on the supply chain, looking for investment to do that on a regional model, because whilst our kitchens cook from fresh, they're not able to take vegetables straight from the field. So we actually need a hub that can take, vegetables straight from the field and deliver washed, potentially chopped or grated or whatever carrot or potentially even a pre-prepared red sauce with lots of tomatoey sauce with lots of the vegetables already in, actually to the school. The schools can't scrub them, haven't got the time or the facilities to be scrubbing mud off all the baked potatoes and sorting through the sizes of them. So there's some investment there that we're looking for, potentially to do a regional hub that will change some of those supply chains. We're doing work with families who are in contact with our preschool services and nurseries in the county, getting them to sign up to a charter, and things like obviously the food and fun and summer events have been brilliant, and that's been an opportunity to get kids trying lots of fruit. I mean, the Welsh Wedge in Schools project has been great at starting that journey with growers, but we're still looking at the moment with a very niche group of organic growers, in addition to the majority of the food which is still coming through the wholesalers. Where I'd like us to be is actually underpinning the supply chain for regenerative agriculture in the county, and being able to take the wonky veg, so that we can actually give farmers the confidence to move over to horticulture, because we're largely a meat producing county. What's been exciting is the work that the children did with the size of Wales, where they said not only do they not want Thai chicken, they want deforestation free school meals. And that's a real challenge for us. How do we take that supply chain? And we've got the team looking at potential of cover crops to do those chickpeas and then end up in the chickpea korma that's being served in the school meals. But we've also got our first 3 to 19 school just opening. And I'm sad to say that's the only school that at primary phase is not within the Monmouthshire Meals team. And we built a 3 to 19 school which doesn't have the facilities to cook on site, to cook from scratch, and went to tender. I'm not sure who's got the tender, but I think it may be Chartwell. So as Welsh Government goes towards 3 to 19 schools, we've actually got a risk of going backwards at primary phase. And I think really we need that direction in secondaries to say to secondaries, you will do this. And then we can move forward. But yeah, it is whole of life. It's through to it's from the breastfeeding uptake and the weaning support through to the Meals on Wheels, isn't it?
The food regulations are rubbish because they're overly complicated and they don't actually measure what children eat. They just measure the menus. Nothing about what they eat, nothing about food waste, no obligation to therefore talk to your customers, i.e. the kids, and work out, what would they like to have on the menu. And I think that's the problem with the food regs. They're measuring things that dietitians have in a laboratory have said, oh, well, they all need to have this balanced diet and this is the way to do it, but it's not measuring what they actually eat.
No.
So it's got to go, because it destroys all creativity and the freshness of a product that's available for the next couple of weeks. So that's got to go. I think on the 3 to 19, it could be that there are people who argue that it's unsustainable to have every school having individual kitchens and individual cooks, because the number of people who can cook is limited, and therefore you should centralise them. So Can Cook Well Fed up in Flintshire, in Shotton, which is a social enterprise, they have very efficient centralised kitchens, which they use for both feeding old people's homes. They got a contract there. They weren't allowed to take on the there was a move against them from LASA to prevent them getting the school meals contract, although some of the schools want can cook well fed to go into their schools because the contract is so poor. But I think if 3 to 19, I mean, if 3 to 19 schools have been built without kitchens, then you've got to go to your central hub model for that. And it's perfectly possible to do that and still have fresh and prepared meals. You're just going to have to perhaps do the very last bit, steaming the fresh vegetables or whatever it might be. I think that a Todman, I've been for years. You just do guerrilla gardening. Every single public space where you can get your hands on it, you just grow. And that, you just don't ask. Well, you got to ask the people if it's private property, but if it's a public space, there should be an expectation that we will be growing vegetables. And the schools in my constituency that have really quite generous plots of land are starting to grow vegetables as part of the education. The new curriculum allows them to do this. They can teach maths, they can teach biology, they can teach the environmental awareness through having a small raised bed. And the other thing is pupil pester power, that Sari, you mentioned. In Carmarthenshire, Patrick Holden, who you may have heard of, he's an organic farmer who grows veg as well as dairy, and he had these pupils to come and visit, and they went back to school saying, why can't we have vegetables from the farm, which is just up the road? And then they wrote to the presiding officer, Ellen Jones, and to the local MP and demanded. These are primary school kids. So, and of course, that's one of the things that provoke change.
Yes, we've been linking school farmers and schools virtually, so they get a farm walk. Most of the schools have growing, but what I'd like to do is extend that into the secondary so that we are preparing people not just to feed themselves and their family, but also for food and farming careers.
Totally.
Anyway, that's enough. Ellie, you wanted to come back in?
I was going to say one really lovely thing is that some learners from schools in Monmouthshire taking part in the Youth Voice Champion Scheme have actually been working with Public Health Wales to inform the new school food regulations and give perspective from children who kind of don't have access to much food outside of school on what they want to see from school dinners. And I think one thing that really heartens me when I get down about doing anything around public policy, poverty, climate change is going and speaking to a group of young people, and you'll come away just with your spirit buoyed up because they really care. They really, really do care. And it's not just a few. The majority of young people are passionate about these issues. And if they're given space to share their views and have input in these kind of decisions, it does make a difference. And I suppose the other thing I just wanted to say is, I know it can feel like something that most of us, can't really influence, but supporting family income is so important because the number one reason why children don't, eat as well as they should is because families can't afford the diet. They often are aware of what a good diet looks like, but they simply cannot afford to provide that food. And we have barriers in Wales and different parts of Wales for different reasons around access to nutritious food. Like I lived for many years in Rotherham and Taff. You live in some of the valleys, everyone shops out of a corner shop. If you can't drive, you can only buy what is in that shop. Fruit and veg is very expensive in that case. It's not always the best quality. And if you're living on a very, very low income, you've also got to contend with how much does it cost to store that food, to cook that food, it's not always straightforward at all to kind of make the sums add up on eating fresh meals. But what we do know, we published a book, I suppose about 2018 now, called Living Hand to Mouth, and it's a book about child food insecurity, lots of perspectives from families and from children and then academics. And that kind of eating patterns improve over a gradient. So if you can make a family even just a little bit less poor, or their poverty a little less deep, their diet improves incrementally. So anything that you can do to increase household incomes will lead to them spending more money on fruit and veg and cooking more meals from scratch. But of course, the other thing that we have, I think, even worse since that book was published, is that families are increasingly time poor. And families are having to work, both parents, all adults having to work. And we also then see also a lot of people becoming iller, more disabled, struggling to cope, and often really, really feeling under pressure. And all of these things just make it very, very difficult to manage a healthy diet, because a lot of us, I include myself in this, the way that we eat is governed also by stress and emotion. So when people's mental health isn't great, when things are really, really challenging, food can be a great source of comfort. And if you can't afford any other escape, because you can't go to the gym, you can't go on holiday, you can't afford anything, food is one of the very few sources of pleasure that people have. And it's also about community and friendship and sharing. And it can be one of the only ways that you can give a gift when you've got no money. All you've got is food. It's the first form of human behavior, isn't it? It's hospitality, it's sharing, and and this is what people do. So that desire, I think, to eat, and everyone wants to eat well, and sometimes they just want to enjoy food, because food is, after all, for most of us, a source of great happiness. But one thing you can do if you want to make sure that people can eat better is, one, that you give them more money, and two, that you make sure that the food that is the most sort of nutritious is the most affordable. One of those things is much harder than the other, I would say, but there's a real case. The amount of children that we are seeing being pulled into poverty by policies like the 2-child limit, every single day another 109 children pulled into poverty. We expect child poverty in Wales to be considerably worse by the end of this decade, primarily due to that policy. It's really, really affecting people. So anything that we can do to get more money to households with children so that they can afford to eat well, that will make a huge difference as well.
Just trying to address my brain to a few of the little things that we're hearing about, and I lobbed this first one in as a sort of a question, knowing that as I'm a good trade unionist, that so there is a clause, there's a you can't do that. Us trade unionists will object, but to what extent could we ever get combination of either? And so I use a variety of choice of words. Which one would work for the school children and the school? Work experience, volunteering, shadowing, or entrepreneurship? Which one can we sneak in to get the kids to be able to assist in a kitchen so that they actually learnt something while they're, so they can do cookery classes. We're allowed to do cookery classes, but what about working in the kitchen? I would have, we have a litter class, but we had a litter picking group at school. Why can't we actually have a group that's willing to help with the cooking, cleaning the potatoes or preparing them, and recognizing what we do with them? So that I've worked out, you could have science lessons where we look at fermenting and pickling of food. You could have an entrepreneurship sort of a class where we look at the healthy tuck shop, and you could have what was my other one? I'm trying to find it. Oh, and basically an allotment class, so they get outdoors. So that would be very creative around the whole curriculum. So what are those? And knowing that I'm a trade unionist, but I don't object to, I'm not trying to take somebody's job. So what do we think we could do with some of that?
Well, we're already doing it. Lots of in quite a few schools, you have the eco committee. They provide snacks to kids and in the break. This is in the primary school. I used to be a lay inspector, so that has been going on for a while. Several of the schools in the area that's got land is using it to help kids grow food so they understand where it comes from. I I think it's difficult within the school day, unless we really completely reorganized it, for children to be cooking, helping to prepare the lunch. But I think it's definitely something that should be done during the food and fun holiday schemes. They should actually have, right, you're going to take it in turns, and 6 of you, because it requires quite a lot of supervision. I used to do it, and when my kids were in nursery, that they then prepare the meal that day, and you haven't got the same pressure. If he doesn't get served on the dot, it's not a problem. They'll just do something slightly different. So I think there's lots of things but I think people have to learn how to cook, because there's going to the fish and chip shop is much more expensive than buying real food. It really is. And if you think about it, just think of any developing country that you might have visited. People eat really tasty food on almost nothing, because they've learned to use herbs and other schemes to make food tasty. And it doesn't require ultra-processed crap, which is all about making money.
Thank you. I think that's probably where we need to finish. It sounds as though there's a great deal to do, but also a great deal being done, and a long way to go.
Look forward to the conference you're organising on UPF. We really do need to get this higher up the agenda, but the target has to be the UK government on that one.
Yes.
Well, we can remove it from our public procurement. We certainly ought to be feeding our nurses properly, so that haven't got sickness levels that are really costing us a bomb. That's all about looking after your staff, but lots to do.
Yeah, just what Jenny just said, I've just put in for the Socialist Health Association in Cymru, the nursing thing, but just staff in general, not just nurses, but anyone in the NHS, just being able to get your break time, have your fluid in. But you're right, where do we access food? Because most of the after hours is just not available at night time and the weekends, which is when we eat rubbish. And you're right, healthy staff means healthy patients. It carries on, doesn't it? And healthy children. We all that's how we teach. We go out. Lots of us in nursing especially go out into the communities and preach as well, don't we? So Jenny, you picked up something.
All right. Well, but I want to see those food lockers with the healthy food in them with people's name on it, those refrigerated food lockers, so that when that midwife or that emergency nurse gets a break, they can then go and get the food of choice that they've ordered earlier and just go and put it in the microwave.
Let's get it sorted. Let's get organised.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That sounds like a great way forward.
The technology's already been cracked by Well-Fed up in Shotton.
Right. Looks like a place to go then. Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you very much, Jenny, for coming spending your evening with us.
Well, food is such an important subject because it's so close to our well-being. And I was delighted to hear you say, Sarah, starting with breastfeeding. Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the biggest tragedies is a lot of women, poor women, want to breastfeed because they know that formula costs an absolute fortune. But they've got no support. So they're set up to fail. Because it's always after 6 o'clock that you really need help, isn't it? When you're breastfeeding.
Yes.
And it's not there. It's not there. And we're the 6th richest country in the world overall, and we can't even look after the basics. The whole thing's topsy-turvy.
Completely agree.
Great. Well, come and see us in Monmouthshire, Jenny, and we'll talk further.
Yeah. Okay. Great. We'll do.
Great. And with that, I'm going to let everybody get back to their allotments. and cooking their dinner. And I think we'll close. Thank you very much, everybody.
Great. Thank you so
Sarah.
much.
Bye.
Have a lovely
Bye-bye.
rest of your weekend.